Hello. I'm Ari Altman from the Tech Buyers Guru, back to tell you more about the EVGA hybrid liquid cooler for the GTX 1080 Ti video card. I previously released an unboxing video showing you what was in the box. I'm going to give you a little bit more detail now that I've sorted through everything. I've also taken a very close look at this manual, which I mentioned in the unboxing video is the incorrect manual. This is a limited run part. This is part number 5388-B1 from EVGA. And I have a feeling that EVGA just decided, well, we don't quite have the budget to provide the correct manual or update the manual from the GTX 1080. So despite the fact that this is specifically designed for the 1080 Ti or TI or the Titan X Pascal, you don't get a manual that says anything about those cards. So I've looked at this manual very carefully. I've looked at the card. I've not yet disassembled it. I'm hoping that the manual is accurate enough and applies to this card that I won't mess anything up, and more importantly that you won't mess anything up when you go to install your own hybrid cooler on your relatively expensive 1080 Ti video card. Now, I've laid out all the components here, and you see there's a number of bags of screws. From looking through the manual and looking at least at the exterior of the card, this is an EVGA 1080 Ti Founders Edition card. I can tell that a lot of these screws are duplicates of what's on the standard card. This is standard NVIDIA design. Some of the screws may be specific to the hybrid cooler. The manual is not very clear. The manual does not even list the screws included in the package, nor does it list the screws you're supposed to use when assembling the hybrid cooler. All it does is note where the screws are on the product. It doesn't say, or the screw holes, does not say which screws you use, and there are a lot of different sizes of screws here. I was most amazed at the screws that EVGA includes. I believe that these tiny screws are duplicates of what comes on the Founders Edition backplate. These screws are so tiny that I had to dig through my tool chest to find a screw small enough to remove them. I found a 0.8 millimeter flathead jeweler's type screwdriver that will pull those screws out. I had no Phillips head screwdriver small enough for those screws. And I bet what EVGA is thinking is you're going to lose some of those in the process, and it gives you duplicates of those tiny screws. A lot of these other screws are duplicates as well. One thing that is not a duplicate is the backplate itself. EVGA does not include a backplate. The backplate, it mostly serves an aesthetic function, but I'm assuming most people who invest in a card of this caliber and then a liquid cooler of this caliber and this cost are going to want that aesthetic value to remain on their cards. I'm going to determine whether or not this backplate can be reinstalled after the liquid cooler is installed. There's no indication of it in the manual, and I'm hoping there's no interference between this backplate and the new EVGA components that are going to go on the front. I'm assuming there won't be a problem, but we'll see. The other thing I should mention is that I will be repositioning the camera, so you won't be seeing me. You'll probably see my hands a little bit, because I want you to see a close-up view of what it looks like to actually assemble this on the card, and hopefully everything goes well during that process. I'll be speeding through some of it, fast-forwarding, because I don't think you need to see me unscrewing every little tiny screw on this in real time. There are about 50 screws to remove and then and reinstall, so it's a lot of work in terms of manipulating tiny screws. And like I said, you're going to need a jeweler's type screwdriver set. A standard Phillips head #2 screwdriver will not work at all for this project. With that, I'm going to cut. I'm going to reposition the camera so you see what I'm doing, and hopefully things are going to go well here. I have, as you can tell, I have not yet installed this, so you're gonna be along for the ride as I determine whether or not this is something I can really recommend to fans of the Tech Buyers Guru, because it involves a lot of work on a product that you probably paid a lot of money for, and you're hoping, despite the fact that the manual is not even for the correct product, that EVGA has thought this out well enough that you can put it on without any damage to your valuable video card. Alright, so I'll be back in a minute. You're going to see my hands mostly, and we'll be assembling this card, okay? See you soon. Hello, Ari Altman back here for the Tech Buyers Guru. You don't see me, but you're going to see my hands. I am going to be walking you through the installation of EVGA's hybrid liquid cooler for the GTX 1080 Ti. I'm going to try to resist the temptation to look at the camera because you wouldn't notice anyway. You can just focus down here where I'm looking. I've positioned the camera way above me. It's like 7 feet in the air, and looking down at my work table so that you can see exactly what's going on. I've positioned this white poster board here so you can clearly see the products and the components in front of you. And we're going to go step by step. And I've realized that there's so many steps to this installation that I'm going to release these videos in different parts. I think the first, I've already done an introduction to the components, and the next step is disassembly of this card. And that is so involved that I think I'm just going to make it its own video. We'll see after the fact. If it only takes me 3 minutes, so be it. But I have a feeling after looking at the manual and looking at the card, it's going to take a while, particularly because there are a lot of very, very, very small screws on the back of this card that need to be removed with an absolutely tiny screwdriver. This is a 0.8 millimeter flathead screwdriver. I could not find in my toolbox a Phillips head screwdriver small enough to remove these screws. So I think there are about a dozen screws just to remove the back plate, and another 15 to remove the base plate of the card. The base plate, by the way, is this. So inside of this card right now is a base plate, obviously the fan, a metal heatsink, which you can actually see through the plastic window here, and then what I'm referring to is the shroud, which is the exterior. You also have the back plate on the back. So what I'm going to be doing now is removing the back plate, the shroud, and the existing heatsink and base plate. Okay, so for now I'm going to put these aside. These new components are going to be put aside, and we're going to focus on removing the back plate, the base plate, the shroud from the existing Founders Edition GTX 1080 Ti. Now remember, all 1080 Ti Founders Edition cards are identical. They're actually based on an NVIDIA reference design. This is an EVGA model. It doesn't matter. There's nothing on here that says EVGA except for the part number, serial number, and a sticker on the back. And actually, even the serial number doesn't say EVGA, but there is a sticker here that says EVGA. So that's the only reason. That's the only thing that makes this an EVGA card. Otherwise, this is really a reference NVIDIA card. So if you have one from MSI or Asus or Gigabyte or Zotac or PNY, any other brand that you know of in your region, it's going to be the same if it looks like this. This is a Founders Edition card. Okay, let's flip it over. As I've mentioned multiple times in the previous videos that I've released on this product, the manual is not the right manual. This is for a GTX 1080 and 1070 cooler. I'm hoping, as I walk through this, that what I've read in the manual applies to what I will see and what you will see right here on this card. This is a 1080 Ti, so I don't know if it's designed the same way internally as a 1080. So the first step in the manual, by the way, the manual refers to both the Founders Edition and the ACX 3.0. The ACX 3.0 is a GTX 1080 model. And as far as I know, this hybrid cooler, the EVGA hybrid cooler, has not been released in a version compatible with the newer ICX type coolers. Unless you find otherwise or confirm with the EVGA, assume that this hybrid cooler that we're going to be installing only works on the Founders Edition card and not any of EVGA's custom design coolers, custom design cards, or any other brand of custom designed 1080 Ti. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to remove 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I believe there's a screw under the sticker. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 14 tiny screws. I'm going to be doing this obviously in real time in my world, but I'm going to be fast forwarding momentarily so you don't have to watch this painstaking process. You probably can't even see how small that screw is. It is absolutely tiny. Like I said, I had to find a special screwdriver that would allow me to remove it. And the only problem with using this tiny screwdriver is it really doesn't give me enough torque to remove these, which may be thread locked. So that's going to be a problem. So what I'm going to need to do probably is cut out here. I'm not even able to remove these screws, so that's not a good start. Oh, here's one. I'll remove the screws I can, and then I'm going to need to cut, and I might need to add a little pliers here to give me a little bit more torque. Remember, I do not have another screwdriver that'll fit these screws. I can't get the majority of these screws out. Okay, I'm back here. Like I said, these screws are just absolutely tiny, and I did, in the process of removing this back plate, not only did I almost strip some screws, I actually even broke my tiny flathead screwdriver. So please do invest in a screwdriver set to do this. I actually had to pull out my Leatherman tool that has a tiny flathead screwdriver on it that's a little tougher, very strong steel. Made in Portland, Oregon, by the way, which is where Tech Buyers Guru is based. So I'm just going to remove the last screw here, which is practically completely stripped. I got lucky that my Leatherman could take it out. So now I know why EVGA gives you a bag of replacement screws, because you're going to chew through some of these screws. Okay, see how this backplate lifts off? There you go. So this is the NVIDIA backplate. I'm gonna put it over here. We're going to be coming back to it a little later on, hopefully. So what you see is the back of the board at this point, the back of the card, and I have some more screws that I need to remove from this card. Here, I'll flip it around. Not that it matters too much, but we've got 4 more screws here. This is what actually holds the heatsink in place. So those are pretty important ones. And then I also have a ton of other screws here. These are, that's interesting. These are like hex head screws. Oh, that's super inconvenient. I'm going to have to use a pliers to remove these. Guys and gals, I hope you enjoy being along for the ride here. I've just removed this, so clearly I have not seen it before, and I see something interesting on one of my, I don't know what that is. Oh yeah, there was a thermal pad on the back at first. I don't know what this component is. A tiny little component here that I thought it looked like it had like frost on it. It actually has a little bit of thermal tape residue from where that backplate touches. So, you know, I said that this backplate is mostly aesthetic. But there's one component here that is actively cooled by this passive heatsink. I guess that's a non sequitur. You can't be actively cooled by a passive heatsink. But anyway, it is cooled, and so I'm going to want to put that backplate back on, even though it is not referenced in the manual as something that you can do. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the screws that affix the heatsink. I guess the heatsink's not going to fall off because those are tight screws. I'm going to use my Leatherman again to break the bind here. Yeah, that's no problem. The only problem with using a heavy screwdriver like this is you can drop it on this PCB and you can damage things. I have unfortunately done that before with a heavy screwdriver, and you can damage the traces in these PCBs. Again, I'm doing it with this heavy-duty Leatherman because my tiny screwdriver set couldn't break the bond here for these. See, I don't know if this is some kind of more thermal tape. Oh, popped out. So these are spring-loaded screws. I think that's done so you don't apply too much pressure, just the right amount of pressure, similar to a CPU heatsink. And yes, these have thread lock on them, so that's why I could not break the bond with my standard jeweler's type #1 Phillips head screwdriver. I needed to use something with a little bit more torque. So, so that's something to consider if you're using these small type screwdrivers. So, like I said, to my surprise, there are a huge number of screws that you can't remove with a screwdriver. You need to use a pliers. Remove, you know, the manual says remove the other screws. I'm going to look at this very carefully because it's not even clear from this picture of this GTX 1080 card, which is, you know, again, the wrong card for this manual, but for this model. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to probably fast forward through it or skip parts of it. You don't need to see me do all of this. I'm going to use the pliers on my Leatherman tool to remove these bolts. That's basically what these are. They're tiny little bolts. Why, oh why, NVIDIA, do you use tiny bolts? What is the point of that? That's super inconvenient. Alright, I'm back, and I have one tiny bolt left to remove. And you are going to see along with me whether or not this allows me to pull this 1080 Ti reference cooler off of the card. I have not undone this yet, so this is the last one. You can see the carnage of screws removed here. There's over 2 dozen, maybe 3 dozen screws here. And I really now know why EVGA has included a new set of screws, replacement screws for all of these. In part I've stripped some of these, but in part these are just not made to be handled by humans. Clearly some of these screws are the kind of screws that you would have a machine install. Okay, according to the GTX 1080 cooler manual, my GTX 1080 Ti should now be fully relieved of any attachment to its cooler. So let me attempt to pull this off. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. It's not removing. Okay. Now I think, oh yes it is. Remember now the GPU has thermal paste on it, so there's a little bit of a bond there. Aha. EVGA has failed to mention that you must detach your shroud from the back. This is called, what's this called? It's escaping me now, but you all know what this is. The I/O panel, I guess. That's really annoying. Yeah, okay. So I have some more screws to unfasten, which were not mentioned at all in the EVGA manual. Let's see if I can do these quickly. That is inconvenient. It's an inconvenient truth. And I have to, yeah. Oh, I think I see which ones are attached and which ones are not. Some of these are attached to the I/O ports themselves, I think. So you're seeing in real time how this goes, guys. This is there. I came off. Okay. Hey, I should write the manual for EVGA, huh? Okay, I found the other screws here. 2 screws on the back I/O panel needed to be removed. Because they were also attached to the Founders Edition shroud. Folks, here is, you're about to see the bare GPU. Got to detach the fan and LED connectors. Okay, come on. I'm getting thermal tape all over my hands as I do this. Okay, there we go. Whew! All right. Oh, that's a painstaking process, folks. Got to wipe my hands off from this thermal tape. So gosh, looking back on it, I guess it wasn't really that hard. There were this many screws that I needed to remove, a number of which required specialized tools. I needed a tiny screwdriver. I needed basically a pliers to remove these bolts. I don't know. I actually took out my hex drivers to see if any of them would work on these. These are so small, I didn't have a tool that would allow me to remove those, so I needed to use a pliers to remove those. You might want to get yourself a needle nose pliers. My Leatherman worked, but was a little clumsy. I didn't think I'd need that. But I was able to take off the shroud, and this is the base plate. It's all one, so thankfully I didn't have to remove the shroud from the base plate. That would be a little bit more work. So gosh, I guess I can put this aside now. Goodbye, Founders Edition. It was nice knowing you. I'm going to put that down. All right. So here we have the naked GPU 1080 Ti PCB and GPU. Now, here's the catch. Again, the manual is not particularly specific. It says you have to clean the GPU, which that's an obvious one. But I've got a lot of thermal tape on a lot of components here. And I'm assuming, I'm going to actually bring up the, where did I hear it? Here it is. This is the new hybrid, this is the shroud for the hybrid cooler. It's actually 2 pieces, so put that there as a reminder of what I'm trying to get on here. This has its own thermal tape. And oh, that's nice. It actually, you can tell it's cooling more components than even the standard cooler cools. It has a lot more thermal tape, but what's funny about it is I can't quite tell. Yeah, it'll make contact with all of these transistors down here. Sorry if I'm using the wrong terminology for that. Oh, and I should also mention that off with the old shroud came a number of these pieces of thermal tape, but not all of them. So you can see, gosh, like what's going on here? Well, this tape came off, but this didn't. This tape came off the memory chips, but this thermal tape didn't. So clearly, I'm going to have to remove that thermal tape. All right, I'm here for the last steps of the disassembly process. Got some isopropyl alcohol here, which I'm going to use. I've pre-soaked this paper towel. I'm going to remove the thermal paste from the 1080 Ti GPU. All right, let's do this carefully. I got a little bit on my hands, but alcohol shouldn't really pose any potential for damage, hopefully. You know, truth of the matter is I really won't know how this works out until I try to start this thing up. I don't know if in this process I've done any damage to the PCB or now to the GPU, and that's why this is kind of something that I wouldn't necessarily recommend to anyone or to everyone to take on. And I should mention here, and I don't know if this will always be true, but at this point Tech Buyers Guru actually purchases all of its video cards at retail. We do get a number of sample products in different product categories, but not in video cards. And the fact that I paid for this $700 card at retail makes me painfully aware of the risks, of the potential for risk, and how I might feel if what I'm doing here actually damages this product. So I wanted to make that known because a lot of review sites might review this product and may not have paid for it, and if something goes wrong, they just won't, they won't write about it or post a video about it. But I'm going to share this with you, and if something goes wrong, you'll know, and it'll be my loss. But perhaps your gain, because there is some risk involved when you're dealing with the internals of a video card like this. I'm just going to clean this GPU up a little bit more. There's some thermal paste that's kind of run over the edges there. So the disassembly process is complete. I think that took me about nearly an hour, really. Not all of it was on camera. In terms of looking at the manual, looking at the product, figuring out which tools I needed. But now I have my bare PCB and GPU ready for installation of a new cooler.